Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to talk about Korech and the preparation for the Seder. Our shir is going to be made up of two parts. We're going to start by going over some of the halachic aspects of this important part of the Seder, and we'll use our discussion and understanding of what we are doing when we do Korech to get to some of the bigger ideas behind this important step. In my parents' home growing up, we would start each Chag with prefacing. My father would always preface the bracha of Shechianu that we say on Kiddush and ask, what are we having in mind when we say Shechianu on this Chag? Because when we say Shechianu at Kiddush, we are saying Shechianu on the day itself, on the Yantiv, but we also have in mind the different mitzvot of the day. So what are the different mitzvot that we have on Seder night? We have the mitzvah of V'higarat Levincha, of telling over the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. We have the mitzvah of the four kosot. We have the mitzvah of matzah, and we have the mitzvah of maror. What I want to ask is, when we reach the point in the Seder of Korech, we've had motzi matzah, and we've had maror. And seemingly, we would have checked off the box and fulfilled both of these two mitzvahs. We've fulfilled our obligation of matzah, and we've already fulfilled our obligation of maror. So why do we come along and make this sandwich? What's the point of this? It seems to not be adding anything significant. Is it adding anything to our fulfillment of the mitzvah? And what is the purpose of Korech? So I'll remind you that as we do Korech, as we eat our sandwich, the Haggadah says, and we usually say this out loud, Zecher lemikdash kehilel. You can see here in source 1, Zecher lemikdash kehilel. This is a remembrance of the time of the Mikdash, like Hillel. Ken asa Hillel bizman shebet hamikdash haya kayam. This is what Hillel would do when the Beit HaMikdash was standing. Haya korech petach matzah umaror ve'ochlan beyachad. He would wrap together or roll together, that's the literal meaning of the word korech. He would wrap together the korban pesach, the matzah, and the maror. It seems like they had soft matzahs like Sfardim, like pitas, because it'd be kind of hard to wrap our matzot. But he would wrap them together and eat them together. The pasuk in Shemot tells us that we have to eat the korban pesach al matzot u'merorim, with matzah and maror, and this is how Hillel understood this obligation, that everything has to be eaten together in one sandwich. Seemingly, when we look at this source, we start off with Zecher HaMikdash Kehilel. This is a remembrance of the Mikdash. It would seem that this step in our Seder Korech does not fall under the halachic obligation of either matzah or maror, but rather is just almost a nice addition that we do to our Seder in order to remember, to think back at the time of the Mikdash, when the Mikdash stood, and how we used to do it back then, or how Hillel used to do it back then. And it seems that there's no halachic weight, but rather this is a nice way to remember the Mikdash. But when we look at the sources, we can see a slightly different understanding. So let's look together at the Tur, an important basis for our halachic system as we know it. The Tur writes, "V'katav od, charoset lekayem mitzvah min hamuvchar." He who wants to fulfill the mitzvah in the best way possible, meaning the mitzvah of matzah and maror, lo yasiach ad sheyaseh kricha kehilel. He shouldn't talk until he does korech like Hillel. כדי שתעלה לו ברכת מצה ומרור לקריחה כהלל. So that the bracha that he makes will sort of count also for Korech. This Tur is telling us that when we fulfill, he's saying that from the moment that we make the bracha motzi matzah, al achilat matzah, we should not speak throughout matzah, maror, and korech. So that all of this is one continuum, one process. If we were to speak, then we are sort of disconnecting. And we don't want to disconnect korech from what precedes it, the matzah and the maror, because we want those brachot that we made on the mitzvot of matzah and maror to count, to be considered the bracha on Korech, on our sandwich, meaning that Korech is an integral part of our fulfillment of these mitzvot of matzah and maror. So how are we to understand the mitzvah of Korech? Is it a nice way to remember the mikdash, or is it a fulfillment of the mitzvot of matzah and maror that needs to be connected to the brachot? So let's take a look at the original Gemara where we learn the source for Korech. You look here in source number 3. We're going to start in the middle. It says here, Amru alav al Hillel. They would say about Hillel, Shehaya kolchan bevat achat ve'ochlan, that he would wrap them together and eat them as one. Sheneemar al matzot u'merorim yochluhu. As it was said, it should be eaten with matzah and maror. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, cholkin alav chaverav al Hillel. Rabbi Yochanan comes and brings a different opinion. He says Hillel's contemporaries disagreed with him. Detanya, as it says, Yachol yeh kolchan bevat achat ve'ochlan kederech shehillel ochlan. Should one wrap them together and eat them at once, as Hillel used to do? Is that how we should do matzah and maror and Pesach all wrapped up together? Talmud lomar al matzot merorim yochluhu, afilu ze bifnei atzmo veze bifnei atzmo. So they use the same pasuk to learn out that each of the different components of the Korech sandwich should be eaten separately. One should eat Pesach, the Korban Pesach, and then have some matzah, and then have some maror. Obviously, the opposite of Hillel's opinion. And this is the initial machloket. And then the Gemara goes on to say, Hashta, de lo itmar hilchata lo ki Hillel v'lo ki Rabbanan. Because we have not decided that the halacha is like Hillel or like Rabbanan, we don't have a conclusive answer. What do we do nowadays? Mevarech, you make the bracha al achilat matzah ve'achel. You make the bracha al achilat matzah and eat it. V'hadar mevarech al achilat maror ve'achel. And then you go and say al achilat maror and eat it. And then v'hadar achel matzah v'chasa behadei hadadei belo bracha. Zecher lemikdash kehillel. And then you go and eat matzah and chasa, the maror, together without an additional bracha. And this is a zecher lemikdash kehillel. So it seems that from this Gemara, we have Hillel's opinion that you eat them together. We have the Rabbanan's opinion that you eat them separately. Then the Gemara says we haven't reached a conclusive opinion, so we should do both opinions. But this Korech step is a zecher lemikdash kehillel, is some sort of remembrance to the mikdash. So how do we understand this? Is it part of the fulfillment again of the mitzvah, or is it just a remembrance when we do Korech nowadays? So the Gemara earlier talks about one of the big differences between our fulfillment of matzah and maror in our time and the fulfillment of matzah and maror back in the time when the mikdash was standing. I'm going to start from Lo Nichroch right here. Lo Nichroch inish matzah u'maror behadei hadadei v'nechol. We shouldn't wrap matzah and maror together and eat them, meaning we shouldn't try to fulfill both of these mitzvot at the same time. Mishum desvira lan, because of this reasoning. Matzah bizman hazeh deoraita u'maror derabanan. Bizman hazeh is one of the important keywords here. In our time, meaning when the mikdash isn't standing. Matzah in our time is deoraita, is obligatory from the Torah. Maror in our time is only a derabanan mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that's obligatory according to the chachamim from the sages. And so it doesn't have the same halachic significance. They're sort of on different levels. Ve'ati maror derabanan. Now, this part of the Gemara explains that in our time, matzah and maror are sort of on different planes. After the Chorban of the Mikdash, when we no longer have the Mikdash, the mitzvah of matzah remains a deoraita mitzvah. We are commanded from the Torah to eat matzah, and yet the mitzvah of maror is almost demoted. It's no longer obligatory for the Torah. That's because the mitzvah of maror is a mitzvah from the Torah to be eaten with the Korban Pesach. Because we are no longer eating the Korban Pesach, from the Torah we are no longer obligated in maror. And so it becomes a mitzvah on the level of Chachamim. And what this means is that if we were to try to fulfill matzah and maror the way Hillel thinks we should do it, by eating a sandwich, we would have a big problem. Because the maror, that's a lesser halachic obligation nowadays, would come along and cancel out the flavor of the matzah. We wouldn't be able to taste the matzah fully. But the matzah is a more important mitzvah nowadays because nowadays it's still from the Torah. And so Hillel's opinion would have a problem here. We can no longer fulfill matzah and maror together the way that Hillel suggested because the mitzvot are in different standing nowadays. So the Tosfot comment on this Gemara, and Rav Soloveitchik in Siach Hagrid explains that the Tosfot understand this Gemara to mean that Hillel originally would want us to eat the sandwich, and that would be the way to fulfill the mitzvot of matzah and maror. But because we no longer are able to fulfill them together in this way, because, as we explained, the mitzvot have different standing, nowadays, what Hillel would say we have to do is to eat matzah, and therefore fulfill our obligation from the Torah to eat matzah, and then to go on and eat matzah and maror. Because according to Hillel, the way to fulfill maror is only with matzah. So again, Hillel would say that we need to do 2 steps. Nowadays, we need to have matzah and then matzah and maror. And the Rabbanan would say, no, we need to do matzah and then maror. And so, Tosfot say that when we do our 3 steps of the Seder, we do matzah, maror, and korech, we are doing this to cover all of our bases, to do the mitzvot according to the way Rabbanan think we should do it, but also to make sure that we include Hillel's opinion because maybe that's the correct way to do it, because I will remind you that the Gemara did not reach a conclusive answer how to do it. Now, if, according to Hillel, that the way that these 2 mitzvot is fulfilled is by doing them together, when we think about what these mitzvot signify, what they mean, we encounter a problem. So I'll remind you of a source that we say on Seder night every year, where we talk about what matzah and maror mean. Now, there's a lot to talk about. What is the significance of matzah and maror? You may have heard previous shiurim in this series about the significance of matzah, the significance of maror, but at the most basic level that we say in the Haggadah. If you can look at source number 4 with me, Rabban Gamliel haya omer, כל שלא אמר 3 דברים אלו בפסח לא יצא ידי חובתו ואלו הן פסח, מצה ומרור. These are the 3 basic things that we have to say on Pesach and understand what they mean. Pesach, matzah, and maror. Pesach is the Korban Pesach. Matzah zu she'anu ochlim al shum ma. Why do we eat this matzah? על שום שלא הספיק בצקם של אבותינו להחמיץ, עד שנגלה אליהם מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא וגאלם. We eat this matzah because the dough of our forefathers did not have time to rise until Kadosh Baruch Hu Melech Malchei HaMelachim revealed himself to them and swiftly took them out of Mitzrayim. שנאמר ויפו את הבצק אשר הוציאו ממצרים עוגות מצות. כי לא חמץ כי גורשו ממצרים ולא יכלו להתמעמט וגם צידה לא עשו להם. This pasuk explains that they had to bake their matzah later in Sukkot because they just rushed quickly out of Mitzrayim with the dough on their backs with no time to let it rise properly and bake it the way we would have liked. So what is matzah all about? When we eat matzah, we're supposed to experience and think about the swiftness of our redemption. How in a moment, in a flash, we went from being slaves into being free men. Think about that for a moment, right? The night before you start preparing for breakfast in the morning, you take out your flour and water, hopefully to bake your bread, and then suddenly, either in the night or the morning, you find yourself having to pack your stuff together, rush out of Egypt, and you say, wait, what about my bread? And so you have to throw it quickly together into a dough that you just stick into your bag on your back. There's no time. And when we eat matzah and we think about that, we reflect on the fact that there's no time, we're feeling and experiencing that moment of geulah, We're feeling leaving Mitzrayim, leaving our slavery in a flash, in an instant, and that swiftness. And what is maror all about? Maror zeh she'anu ochlim al shum ma, al shum shemeraru hamitzrim et chayei avotenu b'Mitzrayim. We're eating the maror because the Mitzrim made the lives of our forefathers bitter. שנאמר וימררו את חייהם בעבודה קשה בחומר ובבנים ובכל עבודה בשדה את כל עבודתם אשר עבדו בהם בפרך. They embittered our lives in slavery. And when we taste that maror, we're experiencing that. We're thinking about how difficult it was to be a slave, how hard it was to live, having to work day in and day out without any time to ourselves, without any freedom. And when we eat this maror, we're thinking and experiencing that bitterness. When we reflect on this, suddenly Hillel's opinion really raises a lot of questions, because these two items raise contradictory experiences and emotions within us. They're bringing us to completely different spiritual places, to a completely different mindset. Why would we want to eat them together? Why would we tie them together? So what is the purpose of eating these items? So we say, "B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mitzrayim." On Seder night, we want to bring ourselves to a place where we are experiencing leaving Egypt. We want to feel like we ourselves are leaving Egypt. שנאמר, "והגדת לבנך ביום ההוא, לאמור בעבור זה עשה השם לי בצאצים מצרים." We have to feel like Hashem did this to us. He brought us personally out of Egypt. And this can explain, Rav Rimon explains beautifully in his Haggadah, what we're supposed to feel when we eat the matzah, when we eat the maror, I'm going to read it in English, although the Hebrew is here on top. When eating the maror, we send our gaze towards the enslavement. The purpose of this focus is to instill within us recognition of the greatness of the miracle. Put simply, as a result of focusing on the difficulty and pain, we understand the enormity of the salvation. Beyond that, eating the maror teaches us that everything is planned by Kadosh Baruch Hu, the enslavement and the Geulah. The enslavement also has a role in the process of Geulah, and without it, we would not merit being saved. Rav Rimon explains here that we need to eat this maror in order to really feel and appreciate what Geulah is all about. And this really furthers the question that we asked previously, because Rav Rimon is saying that this is a two-step process. We eat maror to feel the bitterness, to feel the difficulty of the enslavement, so that when we eat it, and then we eat the matzah, and although the order is the opposite, but when we think about our freedom, and we think about the fact that we left Mitzrayim on this night, we appreciate our freedom so much more because we've put ourselves into that mindset and reminded ourselves what it was like to be living that difficult life. But this really strengthens the question and heightens the contrast between the matzah and maror. And so why would Hillel hold that we eat them together? So we're going to look at two different answers to this question. And we'll start off with an idea by Rav Soloveitchik that I believe was also said by Nechama Leibovich and by others. But this is taken from Festivals of Freedom. And Rav Soloveitchik talks about how when we have our matzah, when we have and experience our freedom, we don't want to forget our slavery. In some level, we want our slavery and that experience in Egypt to carry over. There has to be a reason that all of this happened. And so, although we are out, and although we are now sitting and reclined when we eat matzah in our Seder in our homes, we still want to take that experience of slavery into our day-to-day lives. And Rav Soloveitchik talks about how the experience of slavery has shaped us as a Jewish people. I'm reading at source 7. The experience of Egyptian servitude underlies the very morality of the Jew. This experience has created our morality. The fact that in Egypt, the Jews were exposed to all kinds of chicanery and humiliation, the fact that they were treated there like objects, not people, engendered in the Jewish people sensitivity and tenderness toward their fellow man. Our extraordinary sensitivity to the widow and orphan bears witness to our sympathetic understanding of and involvement in the travail of others. Without the experience of slavery, we would have remained unexposed to suffering, emotionally vulgar and insensitive. The Jews had to see and experience evil, tyranny, ruthlessness, for one cannot hate Satan unless one knows him well and has dealt with him. To hear stories about Satan is not enough. Direct experience and involvement are indispensable. Had we not spent years of horror, we could not have grown and developed into a great nation. In pain and despair, we have attained greatness and nationhood. Soloveitchik talks about how this experience has shaped our sense of morality, because someone who has really experienced pain has so much more compassion towards their fellow human if they're able to channel that pain correctly. And Rav Soloveitchik talks about how you're supposed to take this experience of being oppressed to a place that we internalize within ourselves, that we do not want to oppress anyone. And beyond that, we want to stand up for anyone who's oppressed. We want to take care of the weak in our society. We want to open our eyes and look carefully for those who need that extra help, for those who need that boost, for those who are weak and could be taken advantage of. We want to look at them, remember how it was when we were the weak ones who were powerless to do anything against those who are causing us pain. And that experience should bring us to step in and step up for those that need our help, need us to stand up for them. So again, Rav Soloveitchik talks about the bringing our slavery into our freedom. And Rav Kook goes on a similar idea in terms of saying that it's not enough for us to have experienced our slavery in order to appreciate what comes after. It's not just a contrast between slavery and freedom, but something about our slavery needs to come with us into our freedom, into the desert. But Rav Kook takes it to a slightly different direction. Again, we'll read the translation here. Although I do recommend looking at the Hebrew if you're able to deal with it, because Rav Kook's Hebrew is always beautiful. The highest form of freedom, whose glory and beauty is only revealed by wearing the crown of supreme slavery. The highest form of freedom. Freedom is only complete. Freedom is only at its highest form when it wears the crown of slavery. We can only be free when we are slaves. Therefore, the fullest manifestation of freedom comes when it is sandwiched with slavery, for this will enable a person to elicit the self-control befitting a truly free person, controlling the greatest of forces, freedom. Rav Kook talks about it that when we have freedom, we have all these different strengths and forces at our disposal. But if we want to be true masters of our freedom, we have to be able to control our freedom itself. What he means by that is that when we're able to use our freedom and choose to subjugate ourselves, to master our desire to just be free and to just be masters of our own destiny, and to overcome that desire to just do whatever we would like and channel it towards a new form of subjugation, only then can we truly be free. What does this mean? Rav Kook is talking about, of course, our submission to God's will and our subjugation to his Torah. But if we think about it, we've gone from being Avdei Paro to Avdei Hashem, and what exactly have we accomplished here? It seems that we haven't progressed in any way. So let's revisit for a moment that moment when Bnei Israel leave Mitzrayim and make their way out into the desert. That incredible transition from being slaves owned by others, whose time is controlled by others, who everything they do is not their own, to turning and becoming free men. And you've gone from such constriction into the desert with the whole world open in front of you, a whole world of possibilities, and you can go anywhere you would like. You can choose your path. You can choose what you're going to do. And when you think about this moment with this endless range of possibilities, you can't help but wonder, what will happen if the story ends there? If we say they were released, and they lived happily ever after, the end. So let's think about on a personal level, first of all. On a personal level, where would people go? I can see them beginning to wander aimlessly. One goes here, one goes there. One says, I think this looks like a good spot to settle down. The other says, that looks like a good spot. And they might even start arguing, where should we go? Should we go north or should we go east? Where's a good land to settle in? What should we do? What job should we pick? How should we find ourselves food to eat? How should we support ourselves? With an endless range of possibilities, where would they go? And beyond that, on the national level, what's the meaning of this group if it faces endless possibilities, if it doesn't have a leader, if it doesn't have direction? It's a struggle that I think we can relate to in different areas of our lives. I think comes up for people differently. Some of the examples that come to mind are a child who, when the school year ends, is thrilled to be free of all the oppression of homework and teachers telling them what to do, and the need to sit in a classroom and behave and to study and work hard. But then they come home to 2 months of maybe not so much structure. And they ask themselves, well, what now? And it might be fun in the beginning, but then they find themselves aimlessly wandering around the house from between the pantry and the fridge, trying to find and direct their themselves and channel their day into something meaningful. But they become completely aimless. Or oftentimes when a person retires, they suddenly ask themselves, now that I'm free of the bondage of a job, who am I? What do I do now? What do I choose to do with my time? How do I make it meaningful? How do I direct myself? Another example that comes to mind is when a teacher gives an end of year assignment. So when they say, a creative assignment, do whatever you would like to reflect your process or your understanding of the material. An assignment like that, no one knows what to do. Everyone looks around blankly thinking, how on earth am I going to do that? How am I going to show? How am I going to showcase the experience or the process that I've gone through or the knowledge that I've attained? But if a teacher says, we're going to do a creative end of year assignment to reflect on your process, here are a few different possible ways of creating a project. Here are some different parameters that you need to include. Here are some different materials that you can choose between. Then a student can decide and design how best they want to channel their process, channel what they've learned, channel their own creative abilities, their own places where they feel their strengths to create a project that really reflects on them. So sometimes that framework and those parameters can help us to really fulfill our potential or to really fulfill something in the fullest way. This is a very universal experience that is reflected beautifully in a poem by William Wordsworth. And in this poem, he talks about the very universal experience, but he talks about specifically his own struggle as a poet and the comfort that he finds in the form of a sonnet. This is a sonnet. And a sonnet has very rigid rules. And it's almost ironic to think a poet who's expressing his feelings and expressing his emotions, to limit him by the constraints of poetic rules seems strange and arbitrary. What does this add to the composition? What does this add to his artistic expression? Does it not simply limit him? And this is a sonnet entitled Nuns Fret Not. I will read the first few lines and then I'll skip to the end. Nuns fret not at their convent's narrow room, and hermits are contented with their cells, and student with their pensive citadels. The nuns are not concerned with the narrowness of their rooms. They're not concerned within their lives, because the narrowness of their lives gives them reassurance. Hermit cells are also limiting, but they provide them with a form of comfort. And the poet brings it to, within the sonnet's scanty plot of ground, pleased if some souls for such their needs must be, who have felt the weight of too much liberty, should find brief solace there in the sonnet, as I have found. He talks about how the nuns are extremely comforted by the narrowness of their cells. They have chosen a life of narrowness. They have chosen a life that confines them. And so too, he, the poet, chooses the sonnet to best express what's on his mind, because the limits of the sonnet, the narrow, confined space, helps him to, it provides solace, it provides comfort, it allows him to express best that which he chooses to express. And when I think about this narrowness of the cell, and of course it's also a religious parable, I can't help but think about the feeling that we might often face of the constraints of halacha. The life that we've chosen of subjugation, becoming Avdei Hashem, is one that is very narrow oftentimes. It can feel that it does not allow for self-expression. It can feel that we are so limited, that every step of our lives is dictated down to the last detail. We cannot just eat however we would like. We have to think about in the kitchen checking our greens and checking the hashgachas and making sure that everything's kosher. And then once we've only brought kosher food into our kitchen, we have to make sure that everything is separate, meat and dairy. Then, of course, when we want to travel, we have to plan down to the last bit how we're going to attain kosher food. And we have to plan how we're going to make sure that we're in place for Shabbat, that we'll be able to keep Shabbat, and we won't encounter any problems, and we won't have any automatic doors or censored lights that will cause us different difficulties. The way we dress is dictated by halacha. Our interpersonal relationships are dictated by halacha. And so many endless details. We're in this narrow room. We're so confined. We have no choice sometimes, it feels, on how to go about our lives. But what Wordsworth is saying, and Rav Kook is saying, that something about this confinement allows us greater freedom. And to continue to illustrate this point, there's a distinction that the famous psychologist Erich Fromm makes between freedom from and freedom to. He says there are two types of freedoms. There's freedom from something. There's freedom from oppression, freedom from slavery, freedom from mindsets or thoughts that we might have. But freedom from is meaningless. Or, I don't know if meaningless, but it's not quite enough to fulfill our fullest potential. Because freedom from leaves us in that vacuum. It leaves us in that vast empty space where we ask ourselves what to do. In order to attain real freedom, we need to have freedom too. We need our freedom to be directed to somewhere. We need it to be going in a certain place. This struggle is much more relevant to modern man, and we're going to see that Rav Soloveitchik refers a lot to modern man and this anxiety that he faces. Modern man faces anxiety because modern man has an endless amount of choices. 200 years ago, a person might live in the same village, and they would inherit their father's trade. They'd continue in that path. Maybe their parents would decide who they would marry. But life was pretty much played out the way one expected it to, and there weren't any major drastic changes, which is, of course, very limiting. One did not have much choice. One did not have much freedom. But there's something comforting about that, as we've said. There's something comforting about the confinement. And modern man faces an endless amount of choices, deciding who they want to be, who they want to marry, what they want their career and professional life to look like, where to live. The whole world has opened to us with our plentiful society. We really can have so many options, and we indulge in that freedom. We enjoy it. We love that we can choose, and we always talk about giving more choice and liberty for all people to pursue the life that they believe is best. And yet, that liberty comes with a great price of indecisiveness, a lot of anxiety. It places on our shoulders the great weight. I love this line, the weight of too much liberty. right? There's such thing as too much freedom, which we might encounter in our lives or as slaves leaving Mitzrayim. And I think this idea of freedom from and freedom to can help us think about how we direct our freedom. I heard from Rav Shalom Karmi a beautiful idea. He speaks about how throughout the world, people love quoting, "Let my people go." It's this very universal message. Everyone loves the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, freedom from bondage, liberty for all, and different movements for release from bondage of different sorts have used that ideal and used it as a model. Let my people go, free all the slaves. But when we say let my people go, we're actually cutting the pasuk in half. We're not completing the statement. If you look down here at source 10, this is Hashem telling Moshe what to say to Paro at one of the different stages of his mission. And he says, "V'amarte elav, Hashem Elokei ha'ivrim shlachani elecha." You should say to Paro, Hashem, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you. Lemor, and God has sent me to say, Shalach et ami, let my people go. V'ya'avduni bamidbar. Let my people go so they should serve me in the desert. And not only that they should serve me, that they should become slaves to me in the desert. So when we say, let my people go, we're distorting this, and we're dropping off something essential, and we're forgetting that when we leave Mitzrayim on Seder night, which we will hopefully do in 2.5 weeks' time, and experience this, all of us, we're not just leaving to become masters of ourselves, masters of our own destiny. We are. That is one component of it. We have this freedom, which brings along with it much choice. But we're also beginning to count 50 days till Shavuot, till Har Sinai, where we're taking our freedom and using our newfound ability to choose the path that our life will take, and we're taking that to subjugate ourselves to a higher authority. We're not saying we don't want any authority over us. We're saying we are masters of our destiny, and we are choosing to become slaves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I think, on a very, very real level, if we go back to Rav Kook for a moment, he talks about how that the highest level of being free is choosing to control our own freedom. When we choose this lifestyle, we're opening to ourselves a whole new range of possibilities, because we're opening to ourselves a way of channeling our strengths, of channeling our abilities into what we truly believe is best, into creating a just society. These laws of mitzvot, so many details that tell us how to deal with our fellow man, to make sure to pay our worker the day of, to make sure to be sensitive to the poor man that we give a loan to make sure on Shemitah to let go of our fields. All these little details that create in us this justice, this sense of morality and kindness to our fellow man. Or when we think about how the Torah commands us to constantly seek truth, to always seek the best way, about how these mitzvot that shape our lives push us so much further than I think we would have ever gotten on our own. Because we may have great ideals, but they need to be contained. They need that framework that will direct them and channel them into creating something greater, into creating lives full of meaning, into creating a society full of meaning, into creating HaKadosh Baruch Hu's chosen people that will bring his word, bring the recognition of him to the world, and that will bring justice to the world and create a moral society. So our subjugation here is what allows us to best express our freedom. And I think Rav Soloveitchik, once again in Festivals of Freedom, expresses this beautifully. When we say that God has taken us out of the house of bondage and granted us freedom, we add that the freedom consists of serving God, abiding by his will, and conforming to his mitzvot. God created man as a free being, but at the same time gave him moral resolve and commanded him to abide by it. We were created with this freedom, but then God commanded us to go according to our moral resolve. In other words, God endowed man with the most cherished of all gifts, freedom, Yet he willed man to lose that precious freedom and submit to him. Man rids himself of his fear by faith in God and surrender to him. It is a great price, of course. One must fear God. This surrender to God is very hard. The biological pressures push, and nature summons action, often an action prohibited by the law, be it in the realm of dietary law, be it in the realm of sexual morality. We have desires, we have this push to do things that may be prohibited. All man has to do is to exert his ability to give up pleasure for a few seconds, and the next hour he will find freedom at a higher level. He will be more of a free man than he was before. When man is not ruled by his impulses, by nature calling him in one direction or another, when he has the ability to master that, to master his desire and to express his choices, that will give him a much higher form of freedom. If we had been taken out of Egypt without Elokeinu, without accepting his code, without surrendering to his authority, without obligating ourselves to surrender freedom in order to gain a higher form of freedom, then we would have been in bondage again. Instead of bondage to Pharaoh, it would have been bondage to our own fears, to our own phobias, to nature, to society, to slogans. On Passover, we celebrate our freedom. This idea that we have of freedom, of being masters to our own destiny. Rav Soloveitchik says we would end up simply succumbing to nature, to our fears, to everything that governs us, to peer pressure, to all the different things that pull us. We wouldn't be true masters of our destiny. We would feel that we are chosen, but we really would be falling prey to being led by our instincts. And when we have the ability to overcome and to choose to hold back from our impulses, that's when we become truly free men. That's when we don't feel the weight of too much liberty, but rather we've mastered it. And I think a great way to sum this idea up is in Masechet Avot. I think Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, "En lecha ben chorin." There's no such thing as a free man. Ela mi she'osek betalmud Torah. Rather, someone who is engaged and involved with learning Torah. A truly free man is someone who learns Torah. Now, when we first encounter this, you might think, oh, great. The sages are telling us to learn Torah. Big chiddush. But really, it's not just you should learn Torah. It's not just this is a great reward for learning Torah. But Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is saying the definition of a free man is someone who learns Torah, meaning someone who appreciates the higher authority and who chooses to submit to Hashem's will. To sum up, we saw two different approaches on the halachic fulfillment of matzah and maror. The Rabbanan told us that one needs to have matzah separately and maror separately, and this is how we fulfill that mitzvah. And when we look at that, we understand very, very clearly. We want to experience the beauty of our freedom and liberation and everything that brings with it. And we want to experience the bitterness of the slavery and to put ourselves in the shoes of our ancestors so that when we think about our freedom, we appreciate it so much more. From the contrast, we enjoy every moment of freedom and of choice. Then we showed Hillel's opinion, who seems to suggest that the way to fulfill matzah and maror is to wrap them together. This opinion has its expression in the halachic practice to not speak from the bracha of matzah throughout Korech, so that we do not interrupt, but rather our bracha also counts for our Korech, therefore the Korech being the fulfillment of the mitzvah of matzah. And we spoke about the ideas behind this, that it seems that Hillel wants us to take our slavery into our freedom. And how do we do that? Rav Soloveitchik first suggested that we do that by remembering our slavery in order to become sensitive, moral beings who care for the oppressed. And Rav Kook taught us how when we take the idea of slavery that we learned to bow our head before our master. We learned how to be enslaved, and we take that and choose to then be enslaved in our freedom, choose to be enslaved to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. We enrich our lives we allow our freedom to guide us, to bring ourselves to our fullest potential, to achieve in the world, to create the world that we want, all by submitting ourselves and subjugating ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I hope that in this Pesach we can experience all these different things and we can really appreciate how our freedom brings us to greater heights, and how in our freedom, when we choose to submit ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we'll be able to achieve so much more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so fascinating.